Hi, I'm Dr. Mel, and welcome to another episode of Dr. Mel's Message. I have for the second time a fabulous author with us today. Her name is Rosalie Lauerman. And if you recall, we previously spoke with her about her other book, but today we're talking about Jockey Hollow, where a forgotten army preserved to win America's freedom. Welcome, Rosalie. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Well, I'm so glad you're back on with us. You have a lot to share, and your books are so interesting because they're based off of historical facts, correct?
Definitely.
And I just find that fabulous. The Lost Stories that we did previously covered an era of the Great War, etc. Which one does Jockey Hollow follow into?
It's the second half of the American Revolution.
Wow, so that really goes back. So tell us a little bit about this book and what we're going to find inside of it.
This book is a host of stories of, well, it's not separate stories, it's all one story, but chapters of the various events that occurred between 1779 and 1783 when we actually signed the peace treaty. The fighting continued in the South, and that hardly is known, I don't think. All of the second half of the Revolutionary War um, really isn't covered much. It's just assumed um, you have the soldiers marching off from Valley Forge, and then you're in Yorktown winning the war. But there are 4 years in there where if the soldiers at Jockey Hollow hadn't stayed loyal to the cause, we would be drinking tea at 4 o'clock today.
Wow. Well,
Yeah,
tell us a little bit more about what happened at Jockey Hollow.
it was a very precarious time. The men were not, some of the men hadn't been paid for a year. They had very little food. They were constantly being shortened rations. Nothing ever matched what the army promised to give them. And there were attacks, but they were smaller. They weren't big multi-thousands of people, but there were, and these men had to protect from those attacks. And if there were lots of desertions, and there was a lot of talk about mutiny. They didn't really want to quit the cause, but it was really not in their plan to die of starvation either. So they really made choices, and some men just slipped away in the middle of the night and didn't come back. So it was really a miracle, and that's the way Washington described it in his summary of the war, a miracle that they stayed together. But the men said they felt the cause was their own cause, and they didn't want to lose the chance. So it's about a lot of hardship and how they endured that. And I think it's important to know that as our history, that these people put up with so many problems and irritations and life-threatening situations so that we could have our freedom.
Now, when you say the war continued, you're talking 4 months after the peace treaty. Is that because they had their own cause, or did they not get the memo that the war was
No,
over?
that was not, no, it was before the peace treaty. It was 4 years.
Oh,
between
4 years.
Between the time they went to Jockey Hollow and the time they signed the peace treaty, there's another 4 years in there. There were 4 years at the front where we have all the, Lexington and Concord and all
Right.
those battles. And then there was this section of time that battles became more skirmishes rather than a full-blown battle. But they had to defend. I mean, they had to protect their territory. They couldn't give it up. And part of the genius of Washington was selecting Jockey Hollow because it was hilly and it was protected from, they could not be surprised. There was no way to have a surprise attack on those men there. And
Where is Jockey Hollow located?
it's in New Jersey. It's near Morristown, which is in the center of the state.
Now, do any names, uh, I guess, pop up as historically? Who led Jockey Hollow?
Well, Washington was in charge.
Okay.
Um, Nathaniel Greene, I think, was the but then he had to send Nathaniel Greene to the South because there was more fighting going on in the South. And I think then it went to General Wayne, Mad Dog Wayne. We lived in New Jersey, I have to tell you this,
Okay.
because I talked about living in Illinois. We lived in New Jersey for 30 years, and we raised our kids in New Jersey. So and we lived near Morristown in another town, little town next to Morristown. So I had plenty of time to spend time at Jockey Hollow.
Apparently. Now, let me ask you this, Rosalie. In this particular aspect of this account, and you said it's a story of, number one, survival and all sorts of things. What story sticks out most to you within Jockey Hollow?
The one that chokes me up the most is the Pennsylvania line mutiny, and they made it known to General Wayne that they were not mutinying because of the cause. They were mutinying because they were hungry and they needed shoes and warm jackets and blankets and those things. It wasn't an attempt to leave the army. And they said, if the enemy attacked today, we would be right here defending you like we always are. Not defending him specifically,
Right.
defending the country.
The country, yeah.
But it just brings tears to my eyes because they are, they have been so abused and they are so loyal. It just was really, that's my favorite chapter.
All right, now let me ask you this. Inside of Jockey Hollow, was there mixed races fighting together?
I know that there were some African Americans that fought, like at Concord,
Right.
but as far as I know, I don't know. I can't say yes that I know
Okay.
an African American was there. I can't say I don't know. I mean, I just don't know.
That's fair enough. Now, you alluded to at the beginning of this that had Jockey Hollow not stood and remained where they were, that we'd be drinking afternoon tea instead of our coffees, right?
I did.
Oh, can you go on a little bit more detail about that and why?
Well, if they hadn't stayed loyal to the cause and been there to defend when they needed to, we would not have gained our democracy. We would still be a territory of England, the United Nations, not the United Nations, United Kingdom.
United Kingdom, yes.
Yeah.
Have you ever, this is just curious, have you ever read the British account of Jockey Hollow?
I have not read a whole book of the English account.
What take did they have on it?
Well, they thought we were complaining about a molehill, but I mean, because the uproar was about the tea, the
Right.
price of tea, the tax on the tea. I don't think they envisioned what the Americans envisioned, because there weren't any democracies. This was the first democracy. It was all a trial.
Right.
Test, and it still is a test to see if it'll last.
Right. And we're still fighting some of those same things. I always consider myself a pretty good history buff, but somehow this whole thing that you have brought total different aspects to the Revolutionary War, which is Jockey Hollow, which I thank you for that. Now, just real briefly, are there any other books that you've written about the Revolutionary War, or did you go straight into the other book with the Great War?
I didn't write other books about the Revolutionary War. I wrote a couple of articles that
Okay, articles.
appeared in children's magazines. I'm basically trying to write for middle graders.
What is next for you, Rosalie? I know that you have these two books that we talked about. The first, won't you real quickly tell them about your second book? Or yeah, it is your second book.
Yes, my second book was called Lost Stories of the Great War, and it is independent chapters, but they're all about untold or little known events that occurred during the revolution. I'm sorry, during World War One.
Right.
There's a section about the African Americans who fought in World War One. They fought under a French general because the U.S. Army was segregated, and in order to have a unit, they needed to be more blacks who had fighting experience. These were experienced fighters. And there were the Native Americans who suggested to their captain that they use the ancient language of the Native Americans to send messages across the telephone, because the Germans would never have heard of that language, and that's what they did. And they really set the stage for using that much more in World War II. But once it got out that this is what they're doing, then it was no longer such a successful code.
Well, you've successfully written two, quote, historical books. What would you have to say to the younger generation, let's say, that may not be so familiar with what was going on, whether it's the Revolutionary War or the Great War? How do you get somebody excited about historical facts?
Yeah, I think that's a difficult thing to do. Get somebody excited about history. And I myself, based on my experiences in high school, thought history was about memorizing names and dates. And I know that's what pretty many people say that. And now, after having lived in New Jersey and being surrounded by the Revolutionary War and all the museums and parks and all the things that are dedicated to the Revolutionary War, you couldn't ignore it. And it became personal. We knew people whose ancestors were fought in the Revolutionary War, and that's
Wow.
pretty personal.
Yeah, that becomes personal. And I think you just hit the nail on the head, so to speak, because children today look at history, like you said, as we're going to go over the facts. We're going to memorize names. Who was here? Who was here? Where's that battle? You know. And when you look at it that way, it does get tedious, I guess. But I think what I love about your style of writing is that you relate them to real, living, deceased people, meaning these people had a story to tell.
Absolutely.
And they were real people. And I think that's the beauty in your style of writing.
Oh, thank you.
You get connected to that. These are living, these once walked the face of the earth and fought for our freedoms, whether it was in the Great War or the Revolutionary War.
Yes.
Definitely. And I think when people start realizing that your books covers humanity, and whether it's our flaws or our strengths. And like you said, in Jockey Hollow, there's a saying, desperate people do desperate things. And that's what was leading this mutiny. They were desperate, they were hungry, they were cold. They didn't have, food, water, shoes. And in the winter, it could get very, very cold up there.
Yes, it can.
And a lot of the soldiers literally froze to death.
Yes, that is true.
You
Yes.
know, that they froze to death in the, I'm talking Revolutionary War now. And it was because of the environmental factors that they were in that led them. So thank you for bringing this to light. Again, I've been talking to Rosalie Lauerman, who is the author of Jockey Hollow. And the tagline is where a forgotten army per persevered to win America's freedom. And with everything that's going on in the world today, what's going on here in America today, I think it's important for us to know our roots and how we got to where we are so we can actually move forward. And that's what I think history does. So thank you, Rosalie, for writing not just this book, the Jockey Hollow book, but the Untold Stories or Lost Stories of the Great War, because both of them are fabulous. And for those of you listening, be sure to go on Amazon and get these two books by Rosalie and leave her a review. Leave her an honest review. As authors, we like to hear what you have to say, so it improves us and our writings and where to go. Again, I want to thank Strat Advertising for bringing Rosalie to me. And Rosalie, thank you so much again for being with us today.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
Now stay tuned for the cover reveal trailer for Jockey Hollow.